Saygın Başkanım, kıymetli yönetim kurulu üyeleri, değerli konuşmacılar.
Distinguished President, respected board members, speakers, participants, and esteemed members of the press. Today we have gathered to discuss a very pertinent and important issue. I was especially honored to work on this issue with TUSIAD as a member of TUSIAD and as a member of the Company Affairs Committee.
Bu proje başladığı noktada teşekkür ederim.
When we started working on this project, Turkey had not yet gone through the events of 17th and 25th of December. And during this project, which has been going on for 2 years, I had the opportunity to witness TUSIAD's keystones, TUSIAD's institutional culture, the degree to which TUSIAD adheres to its principles, the leadership demonstrated by the board of directors in these issues. For these reasons, I would like to once again state that I feel proud to be a TUSIAD member.
Görme imkanı da buldum. Bu yönden ayrıca TUSIAD üyesi olmakla gurur duyduğumu bir kere daha ifade etmek isterim. Bu yapmakta olduğumuz çalışmada ciddi...
For this project, we received extensive scientific support from Professor Dr. Alpay Filiztekin, Professor Dr. Murat Çak, and Dr. Deniz Yükseker. I would like to thank them. This survey study was not just a survey study. It was a study that brought together lawyers, sociologists, and economists, where they created arguments together, and therefore it became a study that is a bit different from the previously conducted perception studies.
Ve dolayısıyla daha evvel bazı örneklerine rastlanan algı çalışmalarından da biraz daha farklı bir noktaya gitti. Elbette yine...
To be sure, the study entails some points dealing with perception, but this project became one that highly struggled to be part of the solution and one that tests the solution proposal. Of course, one point that we should carefully underline here is that TUSIAD is not unfamiliar with this issue. I advise anyone who is sincerely interested in this topic to find from the internet and listen to Mr. Tuncay Özilhan's brilliant speech dating back to 2003 when he was the TUSIAD president. You will see that TUSIAD leaned on this very issue back in 2003, as if it had foreseen that we would be discussing these issues in this context in 2014. Again, from that year until the present day, TUSIAD has conducted significant studies on ethics in the state. Ethics in the judiciary was studied in 2012. Therefore, these are not unfamiliar or new topics for TUSIAD. As the Honorable President stated, one should note that our main goal with this project was to come up with a solution proposal, even if from TUSIAD's side, it started with the intention of capturing perception. My colleagues in my office, ELIG, attorneys at law, and especially Olgu Kama, have provided extensive support to the report, which is being prepared. I would also like to thank them.
Avukat Olgu Kama çok ciddi şekilde konuya destek vermişlerdir. Onlara da teşekkür etmek isterim. Peki burada amacınız neydi diyecek olursanız?
So, if one were to ask, what was your target? Well, we have 3 targets. First of all, we wanted to create awareness on corruption, part of which we are now just realizing. As a determination that corruption exists and has the tendency to increase is significant in itself, it is also of significance to us to create the awareness that corruption relates to general welfare. Corruption is not just related to politics or political power struggles, but is also related to the bread on people's dinner tables. It relates to the potential for growth. It relates to economic life. We might also reach this consequence through the presence of the esteemed members of the press here, through their reporting of the Honorable President's speech, and possibly reporting on some of the findings of this study.
Ortaya çıkarılabilen bir sonuçtur. Ve fakat
And also we believe the report has an exceptional advantage in encouraging people to think about these issues. Revealing the business world's perspective on corruption is again one of the key benefits we anticipate from this study and report. As the Honorable President has already mentioned in his speech, and as it also discussed worldwide, recently I was in Tokyo a few weeks ago discussing this matter in an academic capacity. In relationships where there is a giver and a taker, to collapse this mutual relationship, one cannot regard the issue unilaterally. This, of course, has nothing to do with targeting any individual or implicating anyone. However, the occurrence of bribery requires mutual trust. Both the giver and the taker carry out this process in confidence, and they trust each other. One should observe where perceptions are failing and diagnose the warning signs in order to destroy this trust. This way we would expose the precautions one could take.
Alarm veren noktaların teşhis edilmesi önemlidir. Dolayısıyla alınabilecek önlemleri de bu şekilde ortaya koymuş oluruz. Tabii şu noktaya da dikkat etmek lazımdır ki
Of course, we should pay attention to the matter that we may rest our heads peacefully on our pillows tonight, because we did a good job. That is, we did a benchmarking. We are flagging issues. Even if we were not able to accomplish anything with this project, at least we interviewed 801 business people and were able to say that, at this point in time, perception and opinion regarding corruption was this. And we captured through this year's one of the most important projects, which was an extensive scope and for which TUSIAD invested extensive energy and resources.
buydu noktasına konuyu getirmiş olduk. Bundan 5 sene sonra aynı çalışma.
Even if the same study is carried out once again in the next 5 years, which does not put another stone onto the present situation, we believe even this would be an important value in order to be able to compare and contrast the two different results. Regarding methodology, as I previously mentioned, we surveyed 801 business people in Istanbul. Here we are talking about a chunk of 801 persons competent to represent the business sector. I believe this is already self-evident from this sample number, but in order to put it more clearly, this is not an internal study of the members of TUSIAD. TUSIAD did not undertake this study to look at its own members. Rather, TUSIAD made it possible to interview respondents from a very diverse cross-section of business actors of different sizes, different export tendencies, and different types of articulation to the world trade. Meanwhile, TUSIAD supported academics and Ipsos during this project extensively. We are thankful to Ipsos, with whom we collaborated within the scope of this survey. The point, why did you only conduct a survey in Istanbul, could arise as a point of criticism. Generally speaking, Istanbul is a sociologically fair representative sample for Turkey's profile. Therefore, we do not think this as a special handicap. We believe that surveying only Istanbul and not the rest of Turkey gives us adequate results regarding Turkey. Still, we conducted 3 separate focus groups in Denizli, Gaziantep, and Antalya in order to be able to base this scientific ground on the field. First, we obtained the opinions of 36 business people, and we reformulated our questions in light of these opinions. Hence, we are comfortable with our questions when we were directing them to the 801-person group. With regards to business demographics, we can say that no one sector was dominant and that the sample was spread equally.
Şirket demografileri yönünden çok ağırlıklı bir sektörün olmadığını, düzgün bir dağılım olduğunu söyleyebiliriz. Bu gördüğünüz tabloda %25.
As seen on this table, while about 25% of the survey's participants possess the culture of bidding on public tenders, the most represented sector is the manufacturing sector, with 25%. The next largest is 18%. Therefore, no one group is dominant or heavily relied on in this survey.
Temsil edilen sektördür. Dolayısıyla çok dominant, çok ağırlıklı bir sektör burada kabul etmedik. %48'i yabancılarla.
Some 48% of the sample trades with foreign companies. Therefore, it follows that about half of the respondents are directly integrated with global business. What were the 3 main problems perceived by these companies? First, we see that the sector which perceives corruption the most problematic is the transportation sector.
Bir defa şunu görüyoruz ki yolsuzluğu en fazla sorun olarak algılayan sektör ulaştırma sektörü oldu. İlginçtir, yolsuzluğu.
Interestingly, the construction sector was the group that perceived corruption to be the least problematic. Here, I would like to direct your attention to the fact that we conducted a perception study, and therefore the study's results should be carefully evaluated. I'm not making an adjustment because the audience started laughing. I'm genuinely trying to express that we studied perception. If you evaluate these findings together with findings regarding the construction sector, which I will mention next, you may draw some very interesting inferences.
Gene inşaat sektörüyle alakalı olarak birazdan gelen bulguları da bir araya da değerlendirdiğinizde iyice ilginizi çekecek bazı genel çıkarımlara varabilirsiniz. Burada en önemli meselelerden bir tanesinin
we may see that one of the most important issues here is taxation. Now, we are not speaking with the respondents from a corruption standpoint, but asking the respondents, who are you and what are your perceptions of problems? The most significant problem appeared to be taxation, then labor costs, then unrecorded economy, and then corruption. This finding doesn't mean that corruption is viewed as secondary or on the periphery. On the contrary, we see corruption expressed in the same proportion to issues closest to the hearts of the business people, such as energy costs or economic stability.
Bir mesele olarak yolsuzluğun dillendirildiğini görüyoruz. Büyüklük ve sektörden bağımsız.
Regardless of the size or sector, unrecorded economy is stated to be among the first 3 problems, and we observe unrecorded economy to be perceived as a bigger issue as the company size increases. So, if one asks about the perception and the frequency and magnitude of corruption under these circumstances, we are looking at a significant proportion here. Approximately 36 to 37% states that corruption is both frequent and of a high magnitude. What we mean by magnitude here is the amount of corruption, which means that 36-37% of the private sector states that we are face to face with a high amount of corruption. To us, that is a horrifying figure. In a few minutes, regarding a matter about perceived future, we believe the sentiment that we need to do something even more serious about this, we need to build on this first building block placed by TUSIAD, will grow.
TÜSİAD'ın bu koyduğu ilk tuğlanın üstüne bir inşaat yapmamız lazım duygusu artacaktır diye düşünüyoruz. Büyük, küçük, orta şirketler diye ayırdığımız...
When we divide the surveyed companies between large, small, and medium sizes in terms of the frequency and magnitude of their corruption perceptions, we witness that it is the lowest in the largest companies. We kindly pay attention to the change in my wording. A while ago, I was using the phrase perceive as a problem. But here we are not looking for perceiving corruption as a problem. Here we observe that when we ask the question, what is your understanding of its frequency and magnitude, as the size of the large companies increases, this reality leaves business life. Most probably, this could mean that large companies whose corporate processes are defined are more skillful in avoiding corruption thanks to the existence of their control mechanisms and maybe corporate policies. However, as we will determine towards the end of the study, it will become clear that one of the most important lessons is the necessity of establishing anti-corruption policies.
Mücadele politikalarının oturtulması gerekliliği olarak ortaya çıkacak. Zira teşhislerimizden bir tanesi...
Accordingly, one of our findings suggests that 46% of the sample does not have a code of ethics or a corporate policy on dealing with corruption. This surfaces as another important matter in which all actors of the business world should take individual responsibility and think about how each can contribute to this issue. We said that the lowest corruption perception was found in the construction sector. But when we talk about perceptions of frequency and magnitude, we see that the construction sector actually has the highest perception. So when we read these findings together, we find a perception that suggests it happens in my sector with a large magnitude and frequency, and I witness this quite frequently and on a large scale, but I don't perceive it as a problem.
Ve boyutu da yüksektir. Ama sorun olarak algılamıyorum. İkilisine gidiyor olabiliriz. Zira genel olarak baktığınız zaman görebileceğiniz üzere bu mavi...
Hence, as you can see, in general, this blue and that orange or red tile or whatever color that is, this part when read together represents the perception that I face corruption on a quite frequent or extremely frequent basis. When one asks, is corruption in your sector increasing? We encounter another interesting data point. I am saying this in order to turn this into a trilogy. The construction sector says, no, it's not increasing. It is static. One may interpret this in different ways. One might suggest that it's achieved a saturation point, or one might develop this interpretation by thinking corruption has become a reality of doing business in the sector, so it's not increasing, but it continues with high frequency and flow. Within this flow, we do not have the possibility to perceive corruption as a problem from our perspective. So, as the Honorable President has conveniently stated, internalization might be occurring.
Sayın Başkan'ın çok yerinde olarak ifade ettiği gibi bir içselleştirme söz konusu oluyor olabilir. Yine önemli...
Again, I want to emphasize that to implicate any one sector is the last thing we want to do. Life is the hardest for those who conduct clean business, but nevertheless are active in sectors with problematic dynamics. Hence, imposing the same judgments on those who conduct clean business, the same with the whole sector, would be the greatest injustice and unfair. Here we are simply trying to present the results of a scientific perception study. So, we understand that corruption is increasing. Approximately 40% thinks that corruption is increasing. What are your expectations from the future? As I see it, the finding of the study that will lead to the reaction, yes, let's join forces and start having a conversation about this issue's public policy aspect, private aspect, civil society aspect, academic aspect, and about how we will all react is this. Those who think that corruption will increase is 46%.
Yolsuzluk artacak diye düşünüyorum diyenler %46.
Maybe even more depressingly, the 37% of the respondents who said that I do not see this as a problem right now, and that in today's Turkey my corruption perception is not that high, also stated that corruption will increase by 37%. Therefore, it is possible to talk about a darker future perception, and it is of special importance to find solutions to change this future perception. Of course, here it seems the role of education should be underlined. We will reiterate this once again during the presentation. The business world seems to be confused about the very concept of corruption, since I am also a professional, a lawyer, working in these matters and evaluate this issue generally from a legal perspective. We use threshold questions while formulating these questions. These questions touch upon such topics that even us, as the professionals in the field, would discuss to determine if these specific acts would be deemed corruption.
Bizler arasında dahi, bu işin profesyonelleri arasında dahi bu yolsuzluk olmalı mı, olmamalı mı'nın tartışılabileceği sorular.
We are also asked pretty obvious questions. Questions, if not defined as corruption, one might say, if you do not define this as corruption, then you should not say anything more. We observe some shocking results when we put it all together. We should correct the word shocking. As the Honorable President has already mentioned, there isn't much to be shocked over, but when one sees the data with one's own eyes, then the desire to pay special attention to this issue, to build public policy arises. At least this happens to be the reflection in an independent civil society organization, which functions on the basis of volunteering. In a similar structure, which gathers people together, the thought that we need to work together on the fight against corruption, and that the possibility of benefiting the country is high, arises.
Memlekete fayda üretme olasılığı yüksek düşüncesi iyice doğuyor.
So what seems to be the source of the confusion? First, we see that the concept of being right arises too often. Here we did not use the details from the interviews. However, the concept of basic rights came up immediately in the interviews in the form of this isn't right or this is right. And once the concept of being right is used, this causes the definitions to diverge from the accepted corruption definitions. Let me present another 1 or 2 points here and open the next slide. This is the question: do you think providing benefits to a public official in order to get an illegal act done is corruption? For those who answered no to this question, serious and deeper educational activities are needed. This is our core concept: providing a benefit to a public official in order to get an illegal act done. In response to this, 11% said this is not corruption at all, or it would not count that much as corruption. The ratio rises to 17% when asked, what would you think about providing money to public officials from earnings during a public procurement process? Please kindly pay attention here. When the concept of earning enters the sentence, the very money that funds corruption makes the form of halal, an ethically acceptable form of currency, because earning itself is earned, and a perception that earned money would not give rise to injustice, because it is earned arises and its ratio rises.
Kendisi hak edilmiş bir şey olduğu için artık o paraya nereye dolaşsa bir haksızlığa vücut veremeyecek gibi bir algı doğmaya başlıyor ve oranı da yükseltiyor. Dolayısıyla değerler bu işin içine giriyor.
Therefore, values are a part of the issue. What does this observation mean for an organization like TUSIAD? Providing opportunities also for the education of individual values is also necessary. Here we determine that the parents should also take part in this, that we need to create an environment which praises honesty and discouraging riding the gravy train and copying, and generally we need to attach importance to ethics training and trainings that would change these perceptions surfacing in companies. I would like to make an observation within my professional capacity. The example of requesting donations is common in Turkey. The perception of corruption through soliciting donations made to public institutions has decreased. It drops to approximately 20%. Hence, it creates this perception on part of the respondents that I am donating to a third party, which does not directly benefit the person who has asked for the donation. If I am donating to a separate third person, what harm could this have? However, technically, this too is of course deemed as provision of benefit.
Gibi bir algı doğuyor. Halbuki teknik kapasitesiyle bu da elbette sonuçta bir menfaat sağlamak.
Let me put it in a striking way, like I do when I deliver trainings. It is possible to give a bribe through the perception of good deeds. Besides, this way the public officers think that they have themselves made the donation. In this context, it's useful for the business world to focus on these results. Some of the issues we identified, as will be referred to soon, are not issues one might immediately create policies. These are issues CEOs, general managers, or owners of companies may not be able to produce unilateral solutions on. For example, like the relationship between corruption and injustice in income distribution. However, almost all business owners may deal with some of these issues on their own, such as the perceptions we just talked about. For example, what constitutes corruption? What doesn't constitute corruption? If we are to show zero tolerance as a corporate policy, to what are we showing zero tolerance to? This should be tied to declarations and followed up and monitored. If we are to discuss the relationship between corruption and the injustice in income distribution, TUSIAD is one of the best organizations that can address this. Just this year, a study on this important issue was conducted here, and as you know, inequality in income distribution is among the issues TUSIAD especially emphasizes. Inequality in income distribution is the #1 reason among the causes of corruption in our study. Public officials' will to obtain earnings and power is in the second place. This is the same all over the world, however. It might be subject to change depending on the training and the public policies the public officials are exposed to. In order to get this done, we return to the topic of education. The third topic is non-enforcement of legislation. This is a very refined and crucial issue. At the same time, it gives us an opportunity to point out potential traps for future academic studies. I believe that NGOs in Turkey should not spend their energy to tackle questions like, is legislation sufficient? This is my personal opinion. I am stating this in the first person singular. This may not be TUSIAD's opinion on the issue. However, I am saying that this is a legal professional, that existing legislation in Turkey already has sufficient scope. We have sufficient tools to combat corruption. Our legislative framework is sufficient, especially considering the contribution of ratified international treaties to domestic legislation and considering the international treaties we signed, which are, according to one school, above the domestic laws but below the Constitution, and according to another school, equal with domestic laws. The question is whether an administrative authority will enforce this legislation. It is a question of enforcement. This sentence is not TUSIAD's, but appears as the business world's. Non-enforcement of the legislation is in the third place in our survey. So if there is going to be an integrated fight against corruption, one should pay attention to this issue. We ask questions by separating religious education and ethics education in order to be able to understand our respondent's profile. We asked, what do you think about the insufficiency of ethical values education and the insufficiency of religious education? Could this have an effect? And if you consider them by adding the amounts, which you cannot really statistically add, one will increase the other. This is also a very serious issue. It seems that the respondents cared about how the individuals evolved as persons and what kind of moral consciousness they have at a certain age.
Yani biraz şahısların nasıl insanlar olarak evrildikleri, belli bir yaşa ne tür bir ahlak bilinciyle geldikleri konusu da yine katılımcılar tarafından önemsenmiş.
We find that corruption's cost is higher for smaller-sized companies. Again, I am saying this in terms of perception, and there's yet another interesting finding. Either small companies cannot join this process, or if they are able to join, they do so through hardship. The perception is either zero, and this is the highest in its category, or if the perception is not zero, then they state that they pay the highest cost within the average. Within this meaning, corruption's cost on companies is a much debated issue. As also mentioned in the Honorable President's speech, 11% can be accepted as a benchmark. Typically, the international literature suggests the perception that 8 to 15% of the turnover could be spent as a resource for corruption. This is a situation with potentially very exclusionary results, and it could even lead to withdrawal from the sector depending on your margins.
Bir kaynağın yolsuzluğa gidebildiğine dair bir algı var. Bu marjınızın ne olduğuna bağlı olarak belli sektörlerden el çekmeye dahi yol açabilecek kapatıcı etkisi olan bir durum. Yine bize göre
Here is another point that is crucial for us. When we ask, what is going on? What if there is corruption? What are its effects according to you? We encounter interesting results regarding the effects of corruption. Here for a moment, I would like to go back 2 months ago to September 26. The distinguished president, Haluk Dinçer, had received this question in Taha Akyol's show Erizi Doyurusu, aired in CNN Turk. The question was, as TUSIAD, you are not the public prosecutor. why are you interested in this issue?
TUSIAD olarak neden bu konuyla ilgileniyorsunuz?
The Honorable President had addressed the most important issue and then had referred to this conference and had said that TUSIAD was working on this. The first issue to be addressed here is inefficient allocation of resources. The hardships that would arise in relation to business and growth in the environment created by the inefficient allocation of resources.
Ortamda da işin ve büyümenin yeşermesindeki güçlükler. Bunun daha detayına tabii öyle bir programda girilmesine imkan bulunmazdı ama burada bunu gösterecek olursak
Of course, there was no opportunity during that television program to delve into further details. But if we delve into the issue here, we see that corruption has serious results pertaining to the triggering of unfair competition and undermining investors' trust. Accordingly, if innovation, innovative thought, and producing creative products is one of the most important solutions to the middle income trap, which we constantly use as if it is an etiquette concept, meaning the inability to jump above the same level once you reached a fixed national income level. As a matter of course, the R&D and appetite this requires will be dried up by corruption. The struggle to sell to the cheapest price, the most diverse product with the best quality, which results in the highest consumer welfare, will be replaced by the struggle to be the best one to articulate and use the current structure. As the content competition is worn down, the welfare and potential for growth will decrease.
Örselendikçe aslında refahtaki düşme ve büyüme potansiyellerindeki düşme de kendini gösterecektir. Bu yönden size ne sorusunun ki Sayın Akyol...
In this regard, the most accurate answer to the question of what is it to you, posed by Taha Akyol, in his own playful style in order to make his audience understand, is the answer that corruption is directly related to growth and welfare. Here too, we see that this is true. Of course, corruption is a part of a whole, and when the question of what should be done is asked, the first place belongs to the corrections in the imbalances of income distribution and the elimination of economic inequalities. This is a crucial issue. There is a duo here that we need to observe. They feed off each other. The more you have imbalances in income distribution, the more you become susceptible to corruption. The more corruption creates its own barons and oligarchs, the imbalances in the income distribution increase. We need to observe that this duo exists.
Olduğunu da görmek lazım. İkincisi tabii eğitim. Ve özellikle
The second factor is of course education. We see that education, which will be provided to citizens, especially on knowing their rights, is crucial. It is indisputable that a sensitive ethical value education should be provided beginning in high schools with citizenship textbooks and in universities to persons working on certain topics.
Ve etik değerlerin verilmesi gerektiği tartışmasız. Nitekim şeffaflık
Preventing transparency from becoming an etiquette concept and making sure the reasons we need transparency is always remembered can be reached solely through education. We request transparency because the environment that feeds corruption is an environment of information asymmetry. Some people know and have access to certain things, but others do not have access to or do not know those things. This is an environment that feeds corruption. As one increases the transparency, the opportunity to discuss the issues with content and to develop content arises. Hence, this is an important method of eliminating the asymmetries between politician and bureaucrat, bureaucrat and public, public and politician.
Halk arasında, halkla politikacı arasında olan asimetrileri gidermenin önemli bir yöntemi bu. TEPAV'ın bu konuda
TEPAV has conducted a study through Emin Dediolo's authorship, or Emin Dediolo has conducted a study under TEPAV in 2011 regarding this topic. Maybe he will utter a few words on this issue. Again, if one element of education is individual values, the other element should be intercompany training. Even if the following phrase is uttered only once within every company, significant progress will have been made. You will help us go forward in the fight against corruption to the degree you do not accept something that you are not comfortable with, to the degree that you do not accept the things whose content and looks do not match. You will support our fight against corruption to the extent that you do not conduct transactions with shell companies as long as you do not conduct business depending on the outlook.
Sözlerinin yankılanması halinde zaten epeyce yol alınmış olacaktır. Şu anda genel olarak insanlar nerede hayır demeleri gerektiğini de
Right now, people generally cannot figure out exactly when they should say no. First of all, people may have the understanding that they have become a part of corruption only after it is too late. The independent judiciary, and even though it was not one of the top choices of free press because it is a prerequisite of transparency, are prerequisites in the fight against corruption. We mentioned that 46% of companies do not have an ethics code of conduct. This is a matter where companies can take concrete steps. It is not a theoretical matter. A better solution could be the adoption of a compliance program, an anti-corruption program in private companies. This is because an enormous amount of respondents state that they would not report corruption even if they were aware of it. 60% of the respondents said that when we asked why, they said there is no legal reporting mechanism. When you adapt this answer to companies, the matter becomes one of, I do not understand addressing whom and how I should report. Whom should I address about this? How do I know that this person is not involved in corruption? How do I know that I am not endangering myself by reporting to this addressee? I would not want to trouble myself with such a task. There is no system that awards me. I would not want my identity to be revealed. These problems can be solved by the professionals of this topic or by civil society organizations, which are involved in these topics, by Mr. German Brooks, for example, by Transparency International. Companies can fight back with these issues with the help of compliance policies. Reducing the 60% who state that they would not report corruption should be a paramount issue for the business world. Through trainings and through compliance mechanisms, the employees and directors should be communicated the message, you will report corruption. Reporting corruption is your obligation towards me. This is your loyalty and care due to the company. Here, Mr. German Brooks said that companies should set the tone from the top. It is a widely used maxim, and I do not oppose it. But one of the topics that I produced academic literature on is that mid-level managers should also be included in this fight, especially in emerging markets. This is because mid-level managers may sometimes not think that the upper-level management is genuine. They might think that the upper-level management used to act corruptly when they were mid-level, but now that they are upper-level, they have changed their rhetoric. Hence, the penetration of the anti-corruption message may be negatively affected. In order to ensure this penetration, mid-level managers should be given extra care, especially in emerging markets.
Çok kısa ve sizi yormadan ortaklaşa eylem konusuyla ilgili bunu iyice hızlı geçeceğim.
I will quickly mention the collective action issue since Mr. Brooks emphasized this topic. I would like to say this. On the issue of collective action, the association of types of subjects who are wishing to fight corruption is beneficial as a collective action, and this can take place at every level and stage.
Ortaklaşa eylem olarak faydalıdır ve bu her kademede, her seviyede olabilir. Örneğin
For example, besides being a lawyer, I have been teaching at Gürkaynak University Law School for the past 10 years. Each year before graduation, I advise the students that if they witness in a law firm that people are making jokes about bribery, disclose this to each other and leave that place. As long as the students follow this roadmap, they will constitute a collective action among them. This will compel the law offices to act cleaner in matters of corruption. On the business side, as much as the businesses may say, I want you to do your work cleanly and I will be monitoring you. To their addresses for transactions, they use third parties such as customs brokers, architecture firms, addresses before municipalities. They will be deemed to have engaged in collective action. Any type of declaration or monitoring action which would eliminate information asymmetry and bring parties together would be collective action. We've also worked on this collective action topic in our survey. As I mentioned earlier, we were attempting to propose a solution. After we explained to the respondents what collective action was, we asked them if this would work in Turkey. Is this an idea that would work abroad, but one should abandon in Turkey? Or could this work? 66 to 77% of the respondents say that the 4 types of collective action, whose details I did not delve into, may prevent corruption or increase awareness. Their hesitation relates to whether these would be legally binding or to the existence of monitoring mechanisms and sanctions. This is a general criticism regarding collective action. the respondents do not wish it to remain only as a declaration.
Sadece deklarasyondan ibaret kalmasını istemiyor. Şuna iş insanının hemen aklı elbette eriyor. Adam zaten kanunda olan şeye uymuyorsa birbirine verdiği söze mi uyacak diyor.
One can easily come up with the argument that if one is not obeying the law, they would not keep the promises they make to counterparties. Hence, collective action initiatives may progress through the monitoring initiatives. Of course, collective action does not only occur between business people and students, as previously mentioned. The public sector should come together with the private sector and civil society organizations. The role of the civil society organizations is to render the gathering of public and private sectors easier. As TUSIAD, we believe that without pointing fingers, the perception that this is a common problem in our country, and in fighting corruption, everyone should join forces through collective action.
Bu eksenin bütün uçları el birliğiyle ortaklaşa eyleme gitmelidir algısının oluşması gerektiğini TUSIAD olarak düşünüyoruz. Efendim sabrınız için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Sorular olduğu takdirde...
I thank you for your patience. In case there are any questions, I believe we will be able to address them at a later stage.
Sağ olun.